Jonathan Kim with you. It's Friday. We're going to do a ReThink review. This movie is Neshoba, The Price of Freedom. Let's watch the trailer real quick, and then we'll come back and talk about it.
Well, I believe it's a big publicity hoax, but if they're dead, I feel like they asked for it.
They were warned to get the hell out. They didn't do it. So they wound up out there in the earthen dam. Damn good place for them. That's my feeling on it.
My opinion is if it's stirred up, something bad can happen again.
Why bring all this thing back up? It's not going to bring anybody back.
I think it should be left alone. Let sleeping dogs lie.
These people that's saying that, they know that if you keep bringing it up, somebody in their family's name is going to come up.
Why would we want to protect murderers? They are domestic terrorists. They murdered American patriots.
Preacher Killen came with one vote, being convicted back then.
He's probably suffered enough to worry about it knowing that he done it. Good Lord's going to take care of him one day. I'm almost positive that he'll never make me feel guilty of something that he knows what I had to do and say and everything else. So I'm satisfied with him. I'm satisfied with his judgment.
They should hang him, or whatever, however they kill him in Mississippi, that's the way he should die. Actually, I'd like him buried alive and damned, if you want me to tell you. Who the hell he think he is to take somebody's life? Who died and made him God? And I would like him to tell me what made him think he can kill somebody and get away with it.
I'm not a murderer. Right now, I'm the illegal Mississippi official sacrificial lamb.
I'd say sacrificial goat. Now, if you're talking about sacrificial lambs, those three young men certainly Cheney Goodman were the sacrificial lambs. I cannot show the type of remorse that I would for some good Christian family.
We're going to have to do something to make sure, to guarantee that this never happens again.
If those three had stayed at home where they belong, they'd have never found any home.
The whole truth needs to be told for the salvation of the nation.
If you're in Neshoba County, you still carry this guilt.
All right, so now we want to discuss a couple of things here. We have an amazing fact coming up in a second, as we always do in ReThink reviews here. But first, fill everybody in here. What happened originally? What happened 40 years later, et cetera? Just to tell us the story.
Okay, so in 1964, it was what was called the Summer of Freedom, where all these civil rights workers were going down to Mississippi to register black people to vote. Three of these people were Michael Schwimmer, James Cheney, and Andrew Goodman. Schwimmer and Goodman were both in their 20s from New York, and James Cheney was black from Mississippi. And so they were in Neshoba County to actually to investigate a church that was burned. And word got out that they were around. They were pulled over by the police in the town of Philadelphia, Mississippi, supposedly for speeding. But apparently they were fixing a flat tire at the time. They got arrested, taken to jail, weren't allowed to make phone calls. They were eventually released, having to pay a $20 fine, and were told to leave the county. But while they were in jail, the idea was that the cops who either were KKK or knew KKK said, hey, we have these guys here. So when they were released, they were driving out of town. The sheriff's deputy was following them, turns on his siren, stops the car. Another car of KKK guys comes up, takes them down a dirt road, picks them up, takes them down a dirt road, kills them, and buried them in an earthen dam. Well, they shot the two white guys in the head, beat and mutilated the black guy, and buried him alive.
That was in 1964.
Yes.
That's 46 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, did they ever try Edgar Ray Killen at the time?
What happened was the state of Mississippi, it's their jurisdiction to try people for murder. The state of Mississippi would not try any of the people for murder. I think it was something like 20 people in all. They wouldn't try them for murder. So the federal government said, we'll try them for manslaughter. And some of those guys went to jail. 7 men were convicted for civil rights violations and served 2 to 6 years. Killen went free. and the jury for him was 11-1, and the one juror who made it a hung jury said that she would never convict a preacher.
Yeah. All right. Okay. All right. So now, what happened 40 years later?
Well, 40 years later, eventually, like, a new district attorney came in and decided to reopen the case. When there was a lot of opposition to that. You see in the film, there's a lot of people were like, just let it go. Like, let sleeping dogs lie. You know, it's just going to bring up a lot of bad memories and everything. But the point is that, I mean, that the movie keeps on making is that it's about justice. It's about whether our system works and whether we actually follow the law or not. And it's like when you think about the South, it's like, oh, law and justice South, you know, like
what a joke.
Exactly. But with this, they're like, oh, just kind of let it go. And the thing that they said, I mean, the town of Philadelphia is small. I think the population, it's only a few thousand people in the year, 7,300 people in the year 2000. So they're saying if they start convicting people, it's just going to balloon out to like someone in everybody's family was probably involved in this because in a town that small, everyone must have known about it. And you hear people saying in interviews, they're like, well, I think those guys deserved it. Well, they were troublemakers. Well, they're coming down and something that I thought was funny/sad was that you see people talking about that these people were communists and socialists, which is all that we're hearing right now. So
at this point, they're still saying they had it coming. They're alive now.
Yeah, some of the people. I mean, Edgar Ray Killen, who basically was considered the one who sort of planned it and instigated it. He still says, yeah, this was like, he said, I didn't do it, but I'm glad it happened, essentially. And like the guy who owned the property where they were buried, he was never he was never convicted, but the thing was like these murders were not uncommon, and especially, I mean, the people say in the movie that if it hadn't been for the fact that two of the civil rights workers were white, probably nothing ever would have happened.
Yeah, that's the other maddening thing. That's going to get to our amazing fact in a second. But so what happened to Killen at the end? Did he get convicted?
They did eventually convict him on three counts, which he served 20 years for each. He was convicted on June 21st, 2005. And let's see, on 3 counts of manslaughter, and he was 80 years old at the time.
Okay, is he dead now?
He is still alive, as far as I know.
Okay, all right. And so you mentioned Philadelphia, Mississippi in there. I remember somebody giving a speech in Philadelphia, Mississippi, and I found that kind of curious. A lot of people might not know this. This is a very interesting fact. Who gave a speech down there?
Well, in 1980, right after Ronald Reagan won the nomination from the Republican Party to be their presidential candidate, he gave a speech in Philadelphia, Mississippi, and where he talked a lot about states' rights. He said, quote, I believe in states' rights. I believe we have distorted the balance of our government today by giving powers that were never intended to be given in the Constitution to that federal establishment. And it was this speech where people really started to talk about code words, about the Republicans using code words, and that essentially the ascendancy of the Republican Party was based on getting racist Southerners, Dixiecrats.
You know, John, when I first heard about that fact, right, and that was actually fairly recent, a couple of years ago I heard about that. I was like, look, he gave a speech in Mississippi. A lot of bad things happening regarding civil rights in Mississippi. I don't know if that's fair to put it on Reagan, that he meant it this way, that way. But think about this. I changed my mind on it, right? Because, first of all, Philadelphia, Mississippi is a town of only 7,300 people. Why are you giving a speech in Philadelphia, right? Like, it's not like a big area. It's not. So the only reason you'd give a speech in a place like that, and Mississippi, you're going to win anyway, right? The only reason you'd give that speech is for symbolic purposes, right? And what's the symbolism of Philadelphia, Mississippi? Now, if you're still not convinced, he gave the speech about states' rights. And that was exactly the argument of the people who were trying to fight segregation, who did the lynchings, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. Keep these northern troublemakers out of telling us how to live our lives down here.
And when you realize that, you realize, oh, Reagan was loathsome.
Right.
Okay. Now, so, you know, sometimes I make the argument that Reagan would be unelectable today. I make that argument often, actually, because he would be way to the left of anybody running, okay? And in terms of wars, in terms of amnesty, in terms of 100 different things, that's actually totally true, okay? But I always think about Philadelphia, Mississippi when I make that argument. I'm not saying Reagan is more liberal than Obama. Like, for example, he traded arms for hostages, which means he would be totally unelectable today. But that's not a liberal position, right? You see? So keep this in mind about Reagan. And you know, I'm sure a lot of people will make excuses. Oh, but his handlers told him that. So they had a meeting where they said, oh, should we appeal to people who lynched blacks and white civil rights workers to try to get the Southern vote? And Reagan was like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Let's go do that.
Yeah, and never brought charges against them, never convicted them, and basically just let them go.
Right. So now, and then the other point you made was very good. You know, back then, of course, all the people who tried to do integration and end segregation were communists. They were Maoists. They were socialists. I mean, it's the same movie. And you think, like, what the hell are they even talking about communism today for, right? Communism's long dead and gone.
Yeah, like we're still supposed to be scared of that, but I think it's just these
No,
terms.
you know why, though? I figured that out, too. Because I read the biography of Rush Limbaugh by Zev Chafetz. Okay, it's got a lot of issues, and Zev fell in love with Rush, etc., right? But it was still, had a lot of revelations that I found interesting. The reason all these guys still talk about communism is because they grew up with it. They grew up with their dads and these John Birch guys, like the Koch brothers' dads, etc., all being like, communism sucks. And anybody they didn't like was a communist, right? So black people were communists, and they accused Martin Luther King of being a communist, etc. And so that got bred into them. So that's why the Glenn Becks and the Rush Limbaughs, it's like, it's instinctual with them. They're like, they're communists, right? And so now you see where that came from. Okay, so that's all very interesting. There's one more interesting fact, and then I actually want to know what you thought of the movie. Did they pull it off, right? How many civil rights workers, I mean, that's 3 right there. How many got killed in that era?
Well, see, at the end of the movie, they have a list that scrolls by. And what they found was that between 1952 and 1970, 103 civil rights activists went missing or murdered, cases never prosecuted. And when they were looking for the bodies of these 3 guys that the movies are about, and this story is actually the one that inspired the film Mississippi Burning, they dragged part of the Mississippi River. When they did that, they found 9 additional bodies who they didn't know who they were.
Now, that's just civil rights workers, let alone all the black folks down there that were killed for whatever reason, because they looked at somebody the wrong way, etc. And that's just in that era, let alone the 1950s, the 40s, the 30s, the 20s, and on and on and on. 103 civil rights workers killed or missing, somewhere in a marsh somewhere down there.
And these are like true heroes who are trying to literally spread freedom and democracy, helping people vote, you know, which is what our country's supposed to be all about. They were killed for it by people who thought they were happy to do it, thought they were doing God and America's work.
On the other hand, they were preachers, and these guys were, of course, communists, right?
Exactly.
So now, look, but I also see the optimistic side of that, right? As crazy as these rallies get these days, whether it's the Tea Party guys, whether whatever, and the Don't Tread on Me and bloody revolutions and all that talk. I mean, 103 bodies aren't missing, right? So I know it's you know, you have to know that context to understand how this country developed, how a lot of those people are very much alive, right? And how they grew up, et cetera, and why people have the mentality that they have. But also recognize that, you know, we have made progress.
Yeah, and you know, actually, in May 2009, Philadelphia elected its first black mayor.
Hey, look at that, okay? Now you see we're making progress. Right. And finally, what do you think of the movie?
Well, it's sort of a movie in 2 parts because one is telling the story of actually what happened to these guys, and they use a lot of archival footage, which I found totally fascinating, where you see these government officials who are like, "I'm a proud segregationist," you know, and just hearing them being so vehement about their racism, you know, and like you said, it wasn't too long ago, and then it kind of switches gears and goes into the trial, which it kind of felt like 2 separate movies to me, but I think as an educational tool, it's very important to see.
All right, there you have it. ReThink Reviews, of course, on YouTube, Huffington Post, and rethinkreviews.net. John Kim, thank you as always.
Thank you.